Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark Stan. A huge thank you, as always, to our academates on the Bestseller Academy and our patrons over on Patreon. Without their continued support, we simply couldn't keep this show on the road. If you want to find out more about the Academy, get me and Mr. D as your personal coaches, become part of a fantastic community, pop over to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a link in the show notes there. And if you want to support us on Patreon, find us on Patreon or go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Mr. D, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastically well, thank you so much. I had, as I mentioned last week, I went off on a little book tour this last weekend of some bookstores that I've never been to before, some bookstores.
Nice.
And it was fantastic. And I know that on the podcast, it's a thing, it seems to be picking up momentum, and we're going to be talking about it after the interview. People have been talking about their favourite podcasts, and we've got so many of them to do today. But bookshops, sorry. Yes, so I just want to have a shout out to the two that I visited at the weekend, which are absolutely brilliant. If you're ever in Victoria, in British Columbia on Vancouver Island, there's a one shop called Munro's that's been around for absolutely ever, right in the centre of the city. Victoria, by the way, Mark, is very British. There are double-decker buses and English sweet shops. So I had a blast. I was there with my blackcurrant and licorice sweets that I paid about $6 or $7 for a little bag. But man, going around those bookshops, absolutely brilliant. And you know what I noticed? So Munro's, and also the other bookshop I'm going to shout out is Boland Books, which is absolutely beautiful. And the two things I loved about these stores is almost all of the books were facing out. Which you don't see in bookshops much anymore, because it's all about how, packing them in. But to actually just stand in front of like a section and see all the covers, it just completely changed the experience for me, because looking at spines, you're scanning and just looking at names, but actually you're drawn to the cover. So I really appreciated that. And that was something fantastic you don't see much anymore.
Nice.
How was your weekend?
Well, speaking of covers, I've just got the proof covers for The Ghost of Ivy Barn, which is the third Witches of Woodville book, coming in July. Pre-order now. And, well, look, I know I'm biased. It's a thing of beauty.
It is a thing of beauty. I'm looking at it now, and I'm very curious, Mr. Stay.
Yeah, go on.
As to what the glow is coming from the barn. I'm very curious, but it's brilliant. I love how, if any, will you put this up on the show notes so people can have
a look? I'll put a link so people can see
Tell everyone who's not aware of what a proof is. What is a proof? How does it work? And what happens as you as an author when you see a proof?
Well, this is so the proof. I've had the printed pages come through, so I had to check those, and that's literally me reading out loud, from the first page to the last, making sure everything's in the right order. That's so that's all been checked and ticked, and I've got print ready proof pages. Then you got the proof cover, which is the cover, the spine, and the back cover, which is sent to me before it goes to print. So this arrived today, in fact, or was it yesterday? I don't know. Everything's a blur. So you have to. You have to read it out loud. You have to read the whole thing. You have to look at, even website addresses and things like that, and check the spine. Because, when I've worked at publishers, they have done things like leaving the author's name off the cover. That's happened.
Minor exclusion.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you really have to check it out. So, and I'm absolutely delighted with it. The artwork is by Harry Goldhawk, whose artwork is just astonishing. And we got a lovely quote from the Talking Scared podcast, who call the series Enid Blyton Filmed by Hammer, which I love.
Love that. That's a great quote.
Yeah. It really does sum up. And the glow coming from the barn, well, it's like the ghost. It's a ghost, So it's
I guess the clue's in the title, isn't it?
when I briefed the art, they said, give us some clues, give us some pointers. I said, well, there's this barn, it's covered in ivy. And I said, whenever I see it, I see that it makes me think of the shed in E.T., when Elliot throws the ball in the ball. I said, can we go for that sort of vibe? So that's what Harry's done there.
So
that's great.
So you do have a lot of influence on the covers, because a lot of times people complain that the covers are just like generated and they're like, well, it's nothing to do with the book.
Your mileage varies.
Input. right?
Yeah, I'm blessed in that Simon & Schuster do let me at least stick my oar in a bit, and same with the blurb as well. They sent me the blurb and said, what do you think of the blurb and the copy? And I'm very lucky in that I've got something called the Bestseller Experiment Group, who will I'll put it on the group and they'll give me feedback, and I listened and I made changes, and they're absolutely brilliant. So can I read the blurb out, Mr. D?
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely. Go for it.
So we got the shout line on the front. August 1940, the ghost, the witch, and the traitor. So we go to the back cover. Back cover says, in a quiet village in rural Kent, the enemy is at the gates. The Battle of Britain rages, and Fay Bright encounters the ghost of a pilot who won't give up the fight. Before she can help him, Fay is whisked away to join a motley crew of witches to perform a top-secret ritual on the White Cliffs of Dover that could repel the invaders. But there's a catch. The ritual must be executed in the nutty. Mrs. Teach threatens mutiny. Miss Charlotte is intrigued, and Fay wants to call the whole thing off when she suspects there's a spy in their midst. It's up to Fay Bright to uncover the traitor while all dealing with the ghost haunting Ivy Barn, who may hold the key to the truth. But first, Fay has to learn to fly. So yeah, that may be the first blurb ever to use "the ritual must be executed in the nuddy." I think that's a publishing first. Yeah,
I think you should get an award just for that. I haven't heard the word nuddy for a long time, and that's absolutely perfect, isn't it? 'Cause it fits with
I was sort of going in the nip or in the nuddy. In the nip, there was in the altogether. There was in the buff,
in the birthday suit.
In the birthday suit.
I think nuddy's just a brilliant word. It's there are certain words that just fit what they mean, right?
It's my mission to bring strange English idiosyncrasies to the world, So it's
absolutely mission accomplished. I love it. And then the thing I like about in the back cover, it then says for fans of Lev Grossman, Alan Garner, and Terry Pratchett, which I think is brilliant because you don't often see that on books. You do more so. I think more and more I'm seeing it on Amazon now, and it's like in the blurb on the screen. But it's great to see it actually on a back cover.
We've had those. It's insane just to think that anyone is comparing me to Alan Garner or Terry Pratchett or Lev, or it's just bonkers. But we've had it enough times to sort of stick it on there and feel justified, And
I think it's really important. I think it's really important to signpost people because when someone's looking at this cover on Amazon when they picked it up in a bookshop, they have to make a decision, and you've read the blurb, and if that could be the clincher for them. If they're a big Terry Pratchett fan, that could be the clincher. It's like, oh, well, if it's fans of Terry Pratchett, that's me. And I think people tend to shy away too much from comparisons. I mean, because it's never direct comparisons, but it's signposting. That's what I call it. It's about signposting, and it actually makes life easier for people. Like, why would you not want to make life easier for people to buy your book, folks? Right? Yeah. I mean, that's what this is about. So I love it. I think it's really good. And you've got some lovely quotes there from Manda Scott and Rowan Coleman. Rowan says, full of magic and delight that will thrill readers of any age. So it looks like a proper book, mate. Congratulations.
It does, mate. Yeah.
You're kind of like almost there, aren't you, with all this publishing malarkey?
I'm getting the hang of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. 3 books in. This is amazing because this is, it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, if you want to see, I'm joking, obviously, if you want to see how it's done, go look at this proof. Because in this proof is 5 years of podcasting knowledge, is 25 years of publishing knowledge, is working with Simon & Schuster, is working with a great artist. It just brings it all together. And I'm absolutely chuffed for you, sir. And I hope this is going to be the biggest and best one yet. Absolutely. I hope so. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. What I will mention is there's a discarded bike as well, and she hasn't locked it to the railing. I think that could be totally 1940s, couldn't it?
It's sign of the time. Yeah, exactly.
There's no helmet, no bike helmet lying there, which is like brilliant.
The bike plays a very key part in the plot this time, so I don't want to give anything away. But
can't wait to read it. Excellent stuff. Yeah. Brilliant. So let's dive in, Mark, to our incredible talking about Nuddy. There's a bit of Nuddy in this interview, I do believe. Tell us about our interview this week, Eva Leigh.
Well, we're delighted to speak to Eva Leigh, whose real name is Zoe Archer. She also writes under that name. She's a USA Today best-selling romance author who's always loved romance. And she writes that Regency romance, which how many hundreds of episodes are we into this? We've never had a Regency author on before, which blows me away. She also writes as Alexis Stanton. She writes these wonderful novels, chock full of determined women and men who are here for it. And her new book is The Good Girl's Guide to Rakes. It's the first in a new series, The Last Chance Scoundrels. And we discuss writing for reader and genre expectations, delivering and subverting tropes, what it means to be published by Mills and Boone, and how exploring other channels of creativity helps her writing.
Brilliant. So let's dive in and listen to the interview of Mark chatting with the lovely Eva Leigh.
Eva Leigh, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
I'm very good. How are you? Happy spring.
Yes, the spring has definitely sprung. The skies are blue here in the UK, which is quite unusual. So I'm enjoying
phenomenal.
But we are overjoyed to speak to you today because I think you are the first Regency romance author we've had on the podcast, which blows my mind because it's such an incredibly popular genre, and we'll talk about that genre and that period in a moment. But you have a new book, which is The Good Girl's Guide to Rakes, which is the first in a new series, The Last Chance Scoundrels. Tell us about The Good Girl's Guide to Rakes.
Well, The Good Girl's Guide to Rakes is a story wherein three scoundrels, three rakes, if you will, are given an ultimatum by their families that if they don't shape up and get married to respectable women within the span of a year, they lose their money, they lose their inheritance. So these are all younger sons, and also one of the characters is the son of a self-made man. So our hero of this particular book goes to his best friend's sister, which is an extremely popular trope. If you want to talk about tropes, we can talk about that. She's the most respectable woman he knows. And so he asks her to revamp his image, his public image, because no one is going to marry a scoundrel like himself. So he needs her to help him reform his image. And she says, all right, I'll do this. But if you do that, if I do this for you, you have to take me to London's scandalous side, which you know all about. And then hilarity, shenanigans, and a lot of sexiness ensue.
It's fantastic. We've got a few listener questions. One is from Christopher Wills, who says, what is it about rakes and scoundrels that attracts your readers to your books? I mean, these are the bad boys of history, aren't they? Why do we keep coming back to these fellas?
Well, I think one of the reasons is, and one of the appeals of historical romance is there are a lot of societal rules as to what constitutes appropriate behaviors, particularly among the upper echelons, as well as in the emerging middle class. And so because they're almost more rigid in terms of how they patrol behavior than even the aristocrats are. But as far as there's all these set rules that people need to follow, and there's really nothing sexier than breaking those rules rather than somebody who is adhering to them. I think rebels are characters that I think appeal a lot to the Western imagination. I can't speak globally, but I know about that. So I think when you posit a character like that in this world who breaks the rules, and especially because women's roles in this time were extremely constrained, this person is going to facilitate them sort of leaving those roles behind. And as for me personally, I am a Gen X person. I imprinted on Han Solo and Indiana Jones, and those are, obviously both Harrison Ford, but there are also scoundrels and rakes who are not rule followers, who have a devilish smile, and you know that they're fun and they don't take themselves seriously. So all of these things combined make this alchemy of a very appealing hero.
You mentioned earlier about tropes of the genre. This is a genre that has high expectations from the readers. These are readers that expect to see certain things in their stories. How conscious are you of those kind of tropes, and do you enjoy delivering them and sometimes subverting them? Do you like to play with them?
Yes, all of the above. Tropes they're very interesting because when I was initially starting in writing romance, I was not leaning as hard into the tropes. And I think that made the books a little more hard to market, because when you establish a trope, when you say this is a best friend's sister book, then you have certain expectations and hopes that you are going to see get met by the book. So you've already established a relationship where the reader's id is like, ooh, I like that. And then what you do is you deliver that, but then it's also like, how can I create it in a fresh way? What's my take on it? How do I give the reader what they're looking for, but also make it a little bit different? So I kind of sort of try to straddle the line between delivering and also subverting.
Do you ever get moments where you think, oh, I've gone too far?
Not necessarily. I feel like there's a certain idea of what a romance reader is. And I think we all have these sort of notions of grandmoms and things like that, reading their Mills and Boone. And I think the way in which the book market has evolved and changed, younger readers are gravitating towards things which are, as they call, I don't know if they say this in the UK, but in the States, they call them bananas. These things are really bananas. They're kind of out there. They're crazy. And they also like higher heat sensuality in their books. So I don't ever feel like I've gone too far, and I like to make my books very hot. So I don't feel like I'm going in that direction. And sometimes I get pushback from certain readers because they feel like my books are, to use a sort of a derogatory term now, too woke. They don't like the political connotations that I do. And I'm working really hard to make my books political, and also sort of subvert and challenge some of the expectations and beliefs about what constitutes historical accuracy. So I get people who are like, oh, I don't like this book, it's too woke. And I'm like, you know what? If I offend you, then I've done my job properly.
I'd like to talk about that idea of heat, because it wasn't until I started this podcast when I started hearing people talking about clean romance, that thing where everything goes on behind closed doors. And that's a reader expectation thing as well. I mean, you're very upfront about how steamy and hot your books are. When you first started out, did you make a conscious decision? Did you say, I'm going to keep away from that? I'd like to have them kind of steamy.
Well, I think my own personal preference is to write on the steamier side. I like to read books that are steamier. And I personally don't like the term clean because that makes it seem like sex is dirty. So I have written under another name for Hallmark, which is like I don't know if you're familiar with those in the UK, but Hallmark is the network and the books and the line of greeting cards, which are very wholesome. And when I was writing for them, I called those books kisses only. You know what I mean? So I made sure that I didn't have that distinction between like that sex is dirty, because it's not. My books are very sex positive. So I always gravitated toward very high heat books because I found that emotionally fulfilling, since for me, sex is part of a healthy, fulfilling relationship. It's different for everybody, but that's what I like. So that's what I determined that I was going to include in my work.
Wonderful. You mentioned Mills and Boon earlier, which is a national institution in the UK, an international institution now, started over 100 years ago. I think it's much misunderstood by people who don't read their books. But what does it mean to you as a romance author to be published by Mills and Boon?
I mean, it's a phenomenal honor, you know what I mean? Because Mills and Boon is romance in the UK. You know what I mean? It's like when people, it's sort of like the byword, or almost like synonymous. When you think romance, you think Mills and Boon. So to be part of their roster of authors is pretty amazing. And what I really like about what Mills and Boon is doing is that they're working hard to embrace new technology and new readers. So it's nice because they're not like, well, this is what you're going to pick up at, like, I don't even know if they sell Mills and Boon at like Sainsbury or something like that. But you know what I mean? Like this sort
they
of
used to be on little carousels, didn't they?
Yeah,
News agents.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Moved beyond so that. You would imagine like you see them on the doily next to your, next to the with the teapot and stuff like that. And that's the person who reads it. But it's like, and there's the category Mills and Boon, I think, where they kind of do like the billionaires, secretary bride or something like that. There's like that kind of, and then there's other iterations of it. And that's definitely appealing towards a different demographic, one who is more progressive, one who is more open to different expressions of sexuality. And I really like embracing that component of it. And I like that Mills and Boon is doing that too.
No, fantastic stuff. Let's talk about the Regency period again, because certainly in the UK, when we think of Regency, we think of Jane Austen, Georgette Heyer. It's a period that people I guess, think they know. It's a period of history that requires a lot of research. Again, a listener question from Christopher says, you obviously love and have researched the Regency period. What do you do for research? I mean, do you come to the UK often, or is it book-based or web-based?
Well, predominantly what I do in the initial stages, because I've been writing romance now for quite some time. And I started reading romance in the 80s, and that was pretty soon after I decided. And then soon after that, I decided, I want to write these as well. So at that point, there was really no internet. So I did a lot of book research and things like that. And then now with the advent of the internet, I do a lot of research that way. There comes a time when you have a certain storehouse of knowledge after you've been doing it for a while. So you don't necessarily have to look things up. But if there's a specific thing, particularly when it comes to legalities and stuff like that, I definitely need to do research. And then there's always the community of historical romance authors who know this era backwards and forwards. So if you're like, hey, what would be if when I'm talking about an entailed estate, et cetera, which is obviously a big plot point in Pride and Prejudice, that the Bennets are going to lose Netherfield to the next male relative, who's Mr. Collins. And that's why Mrs. Bennet's trying to marry off her daughters. Okay. So it's like, these are the kind of things you sort of need to know and you learn about, and then you supplement and they also shape plot, because sometimes the plot is influenced by what the external circumstances are. And that creates, a lot of fun when it comes to how can I circumvent that, which is usually what I try to do.
Wonderful stuff. You mentioned the 80s earlier, and one of your series, Union of the Rakes, which just all I can hear is Simon Le Bon now.
I mean, I am a huge Duran Duran fan. I have been since elementary school. So this was my tip of the hat. If you guys are listening, which I strongly doubt you are, but if you are, just in case, not that they wouldn't listen to your podcast, but I think they're a little busy right now. But if they are, this is my shout out to you guys, because their music videos were massively influential to me, because they were these little cinematic masterpieces, and they were very evocative, and they had a lot of romanticism in them, and the music did as well. And it was excellent musicianship. And so all of that and 80s music coincided with when I started reading romance. So to me, there's this kind of intertwining. Plus, I don't know generationally how kids of my age were raised in the UK. In the United States, we were left alone a lot. So we spent a lot of time watching cable television. So I watched a lot of narrative cinema, and that's where that influenced a lot of the plots, because those are trope-based plots in the Union of the Rakes series. So it was like it all kind of folded together and dovetailed to create this sort of synergistic salute both to the romances that I read as well as the music and the movies of the 80s.
I just love the idea that you can take this historical fiction and pepper it with references from something that happens 100 years later, movies.
Yeah,
it's terrific.
It's fun. It was a lot of fun to write.
It's good. Also, those early Duran Duran videos directed by Russell Mulcahy, who went on to do Highlander and many other great films. So, yeah. Anyway,
I remember, his films, and I used to watch MTV where they would show the making of the music video before they would premiere the video and stuff like that. So you got to see all of the forethought, that went into, including like, something like the video for the Union of the Rakes or Wild Boys or something like that, which was deliberately a cinematic effort, which that was pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, they were always a big event, I've got a great question from Laura Regan, who asks about your creativity. She says, Eva's Instagram feed is always full of the most delicious looking homemade cakes and baked goods. She always seems to have something delicious when she's sitting down to do edits or revisions. She mentions she uses this as a creative outlet, and she also paints and creative in other ways. Could you ask her how important it is to Eva to be creative in ways other than writing? And does she find that helps in her writing process? So this other side of you, this other channels of creativity, does that feed into your writing too? Or is it just something that you like to do because it's not writing?
I think it's sort of a little of both. I need to get away from my computer, and there's only like refilling the creative well is something that a lot of that works well for me. I can't advocate like this is what you should do because I don't believe in rules for writers. But like for me, it really helps sort of get me away from this two-dimensional thinking where I'm just sort of looking at my monitor. It gets me physical. What's really nice about baking in particular, or even art, but baking especially, is that you have a tangible product at the end of it, because there's such a divide between when you finish writing your book and then the actual time when you get to hold it in your hand. And on top of which, you're not there to watch the reader read it, which is actually kind of a good thing. But so, I can bake some cupcakes and then we can sit and eat them and they're delicious and then we enjoy them. And then there's sort of I put this effort into it. And at the end, I have this to show for it. But I definitely think creative outlets can be very beneficial for writers. I think if we limit ourselves to one particular sort of creative expression, you can tend to kind of suck all the nutrients out of the soil. So finding other ways, be it, music or dance or whatever it is that, even writing fan fiction, I think, is a creative outlet that doesn't necessarily have to go directly into the product that you're producing for sale and distribution. Something that's for you then, and it shows an enriched or alternate side of who you are. I think those are things that can definitely help the creative process.
Wonderful stuff. Where did it all start for you, Eva? How did you get on this? It's been an incredible career, multiple, bestsellers. You write also as Zoe Archer and Alexis Stanton. Where did it all start for you?
Well, let me tell you. No, I sound like an old timey American. Okay, so I started writing when I was a little child, but and I was writing short stories and plays. And when I was 11 years old, I went to London and I saw the musical Cats and I fell in love with it. So I wrote a 60-page typed up epic based on the musical Cats. So I was doing all of that pretty early. But in the high school, a friend of mine started giving me the romance novel her mother was lending her. And I just sort of fell in love with it. Especially the historical romances. Those are the ones that really captured my imagination. And granted, this was at a time when a lot of romances had dubious consent. They had certain power dynamic elements that I found problematic. And so I don't know about your listeners or you, but sometimes one of the greatest motivators for writing is spite. And so I was like, I want to do this better. I want to make it, better to me. I want to make this something where the women have more agency. It always bothered me. So I started writing romance in high school. And so to give you an idea as to what my sort of ethos was, my first attempt at a historical romance novel was the heroine was the captain of a pirate ship. She captures the aristocratic hero's ship and she sells him into indentured servitude. So that kind of gives you an idea as to where I was coming from at that point. Fast forward to me going to graduate school, I was going to get a PhD in English literature. And then I sold a short story to a literary magazine, and I actually wound up winning a contest that they were having. And I started fielding calls from agents, but I didn't have a manuscript for them at that point. I was just working on my master's thesis on 18th and 19th century British literature. So I kind of reevaluated where I was going to go. And then I determined that I really wanted to write. So I left my graduate program with a master's. And then I went and I got an MFA degree. I don't know if you have something similar to that in the UK, a Master's of Fine Arts degree.
MA degree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to a kind of prestigious MFA program where it was all about literary fiction. And I was reading that at the time and attempting to write it, but I was also secretly writing romance, which nobody knew. And I drafted my first complete romance novel while I was still in graduate school. And that taught me that I wasn't an MFA workshop short story author. It told me I was a novelist. Mm-hmm. I wrote full-length fiction. And I graduated with my MFA degree, and then I was doing, some horrendous day jobs while I would get up early in the morning and write. That's how I got it done. Mm-hmm. And then at the time, it was the early aughts. So if you wanted to get in touch with an agent, you literally wrote them a letter and you sent them a photocopy of your manuscript in the mail with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And then you just sat there stewing for months.
Yes, I remember those days.
Yes. Yeah, I'd go to the photocopy place all the time and make tons and tons of copies and things like that. And eventually I got an agent. It took a while to sell a manuscript. I sold a manuscript to Zoe Archer. I sold, and then there was kind of like, one of the things I think about the writing life is resiliency and the ability to get back up again, because I cannot tell you how many times I've had to restart or rethink or pivot. So I've been through 3 agents. I've been to numerous publishers. I've changed my pen name several times. So that being nimble and being adaptable is definitely part of it. And when I was writing as Zoe Archer, I wrote all kinds of things: historical romance, sci-fi romance, steampunk romance, back when they thought that was viable. I mean, I love steampunk, but it was a trend that we had a hard time selling.
Yeah.
I've written all kinds of things. And then I sold to my American publisher, HarperCollins, and their romance imprint, which is Avon. And when I sold to them, they're like, "Hey, how about a new pen name?" And I was like, all right, because it was basically almost like a bait and switch for the buyers at the bookstores, so that they would think like I was a new author and they wouldn't see my relatively middling sales as Zoe Archer. I had a lot of readers who really liked my stuff, but I didn't sell great. So Avon was like, let's sort of repackage you. And that's brought me to where I am today. And Mills Boon published me soon after. I think they have a relationship with HarperCollins.
Yes.
And here I am.
Fantastic. You're right. The determination, persistence, perseverance. People think it's, one novel and it's all days of wine and roses, but it's you've really got to want this, haven't you?
You do. And you need to be able, it's a really interesting sort of dance that you have to do, because on one hand, the outcome of your work, where it goes, how it sells, all of that is very uncertain. You know what I mean? So the one thing you need to have, I feel like, that's an important relationship, is that whatever it is that you're writing, is that it's something you want to write, something you enjoy writing, because that part of the process we can control. And then from that point on, it's not in your control. So if you're saying, well, I see that dystopian young adult fiction is really selling well, I'm going to write one, but it's not something that appeals to you, it's not going to turn out very well. You know what I mean? So you have to you both need to write like what you need and like what appeals to you, and you can position it in the marketplace. So you're like, how can I find aspects of this story or this narrative that also fits into the zeitgeist? So when I sold to HarperCollins, Regency romance was, and as we were talking about earlier, it's a very popular subgenre within historical romance. Well, when I initially sold to them, my initial concept was going to be 18th century, because that's my favorite historical era. But then I was like, well, they don't publish a lot of 18th century. There's a couple of authors out in the world, not only just at my publisher. So would I lose my core story if I made it a Regency set romance instead of Georgian? And ultimately it would still work. So I made that little tweak, and then I was able to, I think, sell it in a more effective way to a publisher.
Right. Excellent. Very, very interesting. I noticed also that your husband, Nico Rosso, yes, he also writes romance. Now, I was curious,
that's right.
Was he new to the genre, or did you have to show him the ropes?
Well, he had been a screenwriter. We're both from Los Angeles, and he was a screenwriter. And then the filmmaking industry is a very challenging place to be.
Tell me about it.
And he saw me writing romance, and he was my beta reader. He would read my stuff, and he always was very respectful, and he had really good notes. And he was like, I really like this genre. I really like what it signifies. I like the community, and it was so much more, in certain ways, it was so much more supportive than the Hollywood community. Mm. So he started writing it and wrote some sci-fi. He's written romantic suspense, and he was even nominated for the Rito Award, which is the big award from the Romance Writers of America. So he really enjoyed it. And he would go to the national conferences, which is predominantly women. I don't know the percentage. And sometimes there would be a spouse tagging along with their partner, and the guys would be like, "Aren't you scared?" And he's like, "No, I'm very happy here. This is I'm much less scared and intimidated and worried in this community than I ever was when I would walk into a production office."
And
yeah. I was just going to say, so he's very integral to my writing process. We plot my books together. When I send my books to my editor, he reads them at the same time. And so when her notes come in, he knows we can talk about those notes, and he has his suggestions and my editor has her suggestions, and we work on them together. And so it's definitely the Eva Leigh is sort of like the umbrella term for a system that involves more than one person. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah. And long may it last. What's coming next from you?
Well, the next book is called How the Wallflower Was Won, which is the next book in the Last Chance Scoundrels series. So of the three scoundrels, the titular scoundrels, two of them are brothers. So the second book is about one of those brothers, and then the third book will be coming, I think, the following spring. So I think How the Wallflower Was Won will be, I believe, late, sometime in September or October. Not sure about the dates in the UK, but it's been a blast writing these. I really enjoyed it. And I like writing marginal, people who are on the fringe, not necessarily the Duke, but the Duke's younger brother or something like that. So this has been a fun experience for me.
Well, this has been a fun experience for me. Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Eva, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. I got to say, I love the quote, Mark. If I'm not offending you, I'm not doing my job. You don't often hear authors say that, do you, really? Because a lot of authors like to sit on the fence or be very safe with their writing to not offend people.
I don't know if it's just about offense. You want to provoke people. You want to provoke, even if it's just an emotional reaction, even if it's just making them laugh, making them cry. You don't want it to. I think anyone who goes into a book thinking I need to please everyone is kind of on the wrong track. You can't please everyone. You've got to, take a stand. You've got to, people go, "Oh, I don't like writing that's political." All writing is political. Everything you write, you are saying, this is me, this is who I am, and this is what I believe. And your beliefs and your convictions and the way you see the world will be perceived as either political or a belief system. So, if this is one of the scariest things about writing, because you are putting yourself out there in a way that people can rank and rate you in a very horrible way if they so desire. So I think it's you can't hope to please everyone. You can't hope to write something that's inoffensive, because why? What's the point?
Well, everyone's offended at something.
Oh, yeah.
Right. There are people that just spend their whole life being offended by the world. We're never going to please any of them. But it's also interesting as well, because no matter what if you put it out there through one of your characters and you take maybe the opposite. We've had the authors talk about that. They create that kind of the character that believes the exact opposite that you believe as an author. And you see, the problem is, even with that, people are going to make the assumption, oh, that's the author's belief coming through the character. And
oh gosh,
there's no way of avoiding it. Ultimately,
we've got an author coming on in a few weeks, and as part of my research, I'm looking at the books, and I'm looking on Goodreads, and this author's written a gritty crime novel, and terrible things happen to terrible people. It's a crime novel. It's a thriller. It's really, gritty. And someone on Goodreads who clearly has no understanding of how fiction works has said, oh, the racism, the sexism, the violence, this is a terrible, terrible person. It's like, she's writing a gritty thriller. What do you expect? Terrible things are going to happen to innocent people. What planet are you on? So anyway, I'm getting quite excited.
But you're right though. It actually reflects, and this is a really good way. If you're an author and you read one of these reviews and it gets you down and you think, oh no, I've lost a reader, or they're going to go and tell the world that my book sucks. The most important thing to remember is the review and what they write is more reflection on how they see the world and what their experiences have been in the world, rather than what you wrote in your book. And I think you're right, Mark. If you do generate a reaction, that's really good, because there's nothing worse than not generating a reaction, which is basically a vanilla response where people don't write a review because they found it bland. They didn't take a position. I think it's a really good thing. It's very interesting. I also liked how Eva talked about like this idea of clean romance, and she called it kiss only. This is a whole new lexicon that I've not being a huge devourer of romance books in my own life. I didn't realize that there's obviously a whole lexicon that grades romance books, because I always think romance and I think, oh, it's clean and it's all lovely, but I mean, romance is a very broad genre now, isn't it?
Yes. Well, she rightly, I think, doesn't like clean because it suggests that sex is somehow dirty. But yeah, again, it's that thing of this kind of romance. There are big reader expectations, and there are some that are going to be read by people who want, as she said, and I love this term, higher heat sensuality. Okay, do you want some higher heat sensuality tonight, darling? Oh yes, please. Or they want something.
I'll turn up the heated blanket,
the electric blanket, and a hot water bottle.
Can I turn up to 6? Brilliant.
Or there are people who just want the innocence of romance, who just they don't want to see what goes on behind the door. They just, they're happy with the image of the closed door, and then that can stay in that room, but they still want to experience the passion, the romance.
Yeah.
So I think you have to, it's a genre where you have to make that absolutely clear from the beginning, because again, you can't please everyone with these books. You need to say, okay, this is the track I'm going to take. There's that
that's
route.
The thing, right? Yeah. Once you cross a line,
Yeah,
I mean, it is. It's a very interesting one. We talk about politically crossing lines, but like in romance books, it's like how much do you are you going for the clean Mills and Boone type delivery, or are you going to go for something which is
Mills
out there?
Mills and Boone do have that higher heat sensuality, but it's that thing of if you're writing as Eva Leigh and you're delivering that heat, and then as Eva Leigh you write something that's there's none of that. Eva Leigh fans are going to be, where's my hanky panky?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the big pull for them. It's very interesting as well. I've noticed as well a lot more. I've heard this term sex positive come up a lot as well.
Yes.
And I was really hoping you'd go deep dive into that, Mark, and you just said wonderful and moved straight on. I thought, awkward moment. It was brilliant. But no, it's like even I think it's kind of a healthy development, I think, within every area, whether it's literacy or retail. It's all shifting, and it feels like it's shifting in the book world as well.
I'm sure, like me, you grew up listening to people like Kate Bush and Tori Amos, and every now and then they would do a song where it's like, oh, girls enjoy sex too. There's always an assumption that sex is a grotty, dirty thing, but actually, it's a wonderful thing between two consensual adults who love each other. That is, sex positive, and as long as everyone's, happy and consensual, it's all great. So, this is. it was. I mean, my nan used to read Mills and Boone. She was Irish Catholic, never discussed anything remotely kind of saucy, never wanted to discuss it. And it all went on behind that door. It was never discussed, Whereas I grew up reading Claire Rayner's, sex education book, which I actually found on eBay and we bought for our kids as well, where it talks very frankly with lovely cartoons and illustrations about the whole body, the human body, but also sexual reproduction, all of that kind of thing. So we have no hang-ups whatsoever about this stuff. And, we talk about it a lot. So again, it depends on what sort of family, what sort of people, what sort of couple, what sort of relationships you are. You may not wish to discuss that, and that's fine if you're both signed off on that, although I think it is healthy to discuss these things, whereas we talk about it over dinner, Well,
yeah, but it's interesting within books as well. I think books can actually be an instigator for those kind of discussions, and they can also play a role in relationships as well. I think, and I also think as well, when you talk about people that like their kind of, they're clean or kiss only romance. I don't know if they've always just stuck to reading those. They might enjoy those for the stories and the actual romance that's in there. But I'd be surprised if none of them had ever ventured into stuff that was a little bit more high heat, as you like to say, because you kind of it's like some people like to they enjoy crime dramas or thriller dramas, and there's different levels of intensity. There's got you kind of Breaking Bad, like full on, like some really grotesque moments in there, right? And then you might just want something a bit more kind of not more vanilla, but like something a bit less gruesome, and so it's whatever you want in the moment. So it's but you're right. You have to. I think as an author, you have to kind of decide what that book's going to be. Is it going to? There's almost like a line that you cross, and once you cross it, then people stay with you, then they want more of that. And if you don't cross it, then you have to kind of stick that side of the line as well. And
you need to be consistent. I think once you've made that decision, you can't do you kind of want a better word, clean romance, and then in the middle of it have this massive bondage session, So you can't,
exactly. So
you can't. No, that's wrong. You can't do that.
And I do think there's a lot of. I'd be interesting to survey a lot of authors who write romance as to whether they do have two different pen names, because I think it's very common. It's probably very common, isn't it? And that's so it's not like you can't write both. It's like that you actually have to, just have a series and a different name under one, so people know what they people know what to expect.
Exactly.
But it's interesting. But again, I found it fascinating that Eva's husband writes romance. That's a very rare thing, isn't it, in a relationship where you get, rare that both authors write the same genre, but also very rare that you get, the both partners writing romance. I don't think I've ever heard that on the podcast before in 5 years.
Well, again, it's a positive thing. I've been to the RNA conference once, and I'm hoping to go. I am going again this summer. There's like 3 blokes there. It's obviously a genre dominated by women. I think. I enjoy going because it's a really, really welcoming community. They're lovely there. We've had some great romance authors on the podcast. I've interviewed them at the RNA, and it's made me think a lot more about the romance in my books as well, because I've got this ongoing thing with Faye and Bertie in my novels. And I went to Rhoda Baxter, read my first book, and gave me some brilliant feedback on the romance and that. And it's a genre I find really challenging to write as well, because when it's done well, it's sublime. When it's done badly, it's really cloying and obvious. And, so I'm determined to make it as good as possible. But I think that he's also come from the screenwriting world. And as he said, Hollywood chew you up and spit you out again. It's, every screenwriter has their horror stories. I think when you find a community, it's like, hey, come and write about love. Write about the most positive thing in the world. Yeah, there are ups and downs, but in the end, love is all you need, as the poet once said.
Well, exactly. And I think there's something to be said as well when you especially during darker times, people often revert to the opposite. They want to read, if they're getting reality. I've got an interview coming up in a few months where we were talking about like how when reality, like the war happens in the real world, it suddenly makes you stop and think, well, actually, maybe I want to read something different than that. So I think it's really interesting that there's those, that I think it must be a much more positive experience and a lot better night's sleep when you're writing a romance than when you're writing a kind of a, something really, really terrifying and scary, which is filling your head full of all kinds of interesting thoughts. So, yeah. And I'll also be interested, Mark, as well, on that note of kind of male romance authors, how many of them, of that population that are out there, actually write under a female pseudonym because they're worried about putting, like, no one's going to read. Because we went through this, didn't we? We wrote Back to Reality with a female lead, and we did have that kind of dark night of the soul moment where we thought, do we really want to put this book out under two male names? Because are people really going to buy that? Whereas, and I still wonder to this day what would have happened if you could like run parallel worlds. What would have happened if we just put it out under, what were some of the names that we were thinking?
Man, don't make me go back to that.
It was hilarious. We got some like combinations of our names as a female author. It was, we must dig it up because there were some hilarious ones, weren't there? But if the thing, you could put a book out, maybe with a different title, but with a female author, and just stick it out, different cover, and just see what happens based on the perception of who writes it. Because the thing that we often got in the reviews was, I can't believe two blokes have managed to write this female lead so well, which was such an amazing compliment. But it was almost like a surprise of, well, they seem to actually pull it off, whereas everyone's like, oh, this is gonna be a riot, But it is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe we should do that one day.
We should.
I'm sure that the trouble is, I think Amazon now have algorithms that look for piracy, because there are naughty people out there who will just copy and paste entire books, put a different title and author on them and flog them, which is...
Well, we should just do a second edition and just update a couple of the chapters just to break the algorithm and see what happens. That would be the ultimate experiment, because we've talked about, we've referenced this about how incredible it can be just to change the front cover of a book, and how that launched Shannon Mayer's career. And we've heard it so many times over. A good cover can really make a book propel forward. I've never heard of someone changing a title and an author name and putting out the same story and seeing if it flies. I'm tempted. I'm really tempted.
There's enough distance between the two. I may regret this in the morning, but maybe we should
toy with it. Let's toy with it.
Let's talk about that later.
Actually, I'll tell you what. If anyone's ever done that, so that here we go. If anyone's, maybe you could help us here. If anyone's ever actually put out, either a female writing a male character and originally put themselves out as the female author, and then changed to a male name, what happened, and vice versa. We want to hear from you. Let us know what happened. Who knows? Brilliant stuff. Now, Mr. Stay, lots going on social media. I hear lots of bookshop recommendations. There's all kinds of things kicking off.
We've got all sorts of guys. Just before we go into that, a quick Andy update. Now, Andrew Chapman, long-term supporter of the podcast. And if you've been listening to podcasts for the last few weeks, you'll know that we're coming up to the 12th of May, which is the date that Andrew Chapman is staying up for 24 hours to write a novel. Now, this was insane enough. Now, just to give you a quick catch up, Andy wanted to write a novel in a day, stay up 24 hours. It's based on a screenplay that he's already written, and it's called TheMaskCollector. And it's an absolutely cracking premise about these guys who do a bank job, and it turns into a hostage situation, but one of the hostages is a serial killer. It's a brilliant premise. And Andrew's going to spend the 12th of May from, morning till night, 24 hours writing this book non-stop. Now, he's up the ante, Mr. D. He's up the ante.
How can you up an ante of a 50,000 word novel in 24 hours?
Because he's announced the release date.
Brilliant.
Right. Okay. So
don't tell me it's the next day, is it?
No, it's not. No. Good. You know what? He was talking about it, but the BXP group talked him off that particular edge. It's coming on the 31st of July.
Wow. Okay. So that's a major turnaround.
It's already up for pre-order. So we're going to put the link in the show notes, and you can check. But if you look on Amazon, The Mask Collector, Andrew Chapman, it's already there. It's already hit the top 50 in horror fiction classics in the Kindle store in the UK. So it's like, I've not written it, but it's already, in the top 50 in the charts. I'm going to put a link to a video as well where he explains this, and he has a clip of us talking about what it's all about. So, folks, there's going to be a link in the show notes so you can pre-order it. Look for the hashtag novel in a day and the hashtag The Mask Collector on the 12th of May, and give Andy all your support on the way. It's going to be amazing.
I'm looking forward to this. Absolutely brilliant. Well, all the best, Andrew, because I know once we finish recording this, I do believe the next episode will be coming out after Andrew's done it. So listen out, folks. We'll give you an update on how everything went. Fantastic.
Brilliant. So yes, social media. So yes, on the BXP team, Jack Levers got in touch. He's published a book. His book, Don't Play Dead with the Vultures, is a big-ass action thriller that I chose not to substantially cut down following feedback from a big publisher. I'll hit them with the next one. I had a pretty chaotic book launch run on Friday night. Now, so what he's done, Jack, so obviously, he's put this out there. No publisher's picked it up, so he's published it himself, and it looks great. Don't Play Dead with Vultures, cracking stuff. And the shoutline is, if you gotta go hard, which I love. But what he's done to publish, and this has already happened, this is on the 29th of April, he's gone on a pub crawl with a handful of paperback. And so if you were to go up to Jack and say the word vultures, he would give you a free copy. What a genius idea. What an absolutely genius idea. So congratulations on that, Jack. And and folks, check out Don't Play Dead with Vultures if that's your thing. Tanya Scott on the BXP group as well. She's just released a new book as well. It's called The Case of the Criminal Cruise, and it's a Rennie Brienne mystery. It's the second one in the series. It's a 1920s Agatha Christie style mystery. Fantastic. Tanya, huge congrats on that. The BXP team just pumping books out there left, right, and centre. It's just fantastic.
That's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Tanya. And I think this is also the post-COVID effect, isn't it, Mark, of everyone who's been kind of tucked away writing, and now we're seeing a great flow of books coming out.
It's amazing. And we're getting more and more recommendations for bookshops. We love hearing about your favourite bookshops. Do not stop sending them in. We love to hear about them. Wendy Coath said, what about All Good Bookshop in Wood Green? They run events, author talks, and it's a comedy club. And that's a mix I've never heard before.
Sounds like my dreamy day out and evening out.
It's brilliant, isn't it? You could stay there all day, read a book, have an event, have some comedy. Brilliant. So thanks for that, Wendy. We'll put a link to the All Good Bookshop in the show notes, so you can check that out. Liz in the BXP team and in the Academy raves about window seat books. Two of the coolest staff members who truly nerd out about books. Andre, the owner, she created some excellent programs during the first year of the pandemic to make sure folks could safely access books and branch out their reading as we all hunkered down and twiddled thumbs. So yeah, window seat books, check them out. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Liz. And Elizabeth Hurley said, I'm a big fan of this place, Hurley Books in Mevagissey. Elizabeth Hurley runs Hurley Books in Mevagissey, and it is I follow their Instagram account, and it's absolutely brilliant. It looks just fantastic. Elizabeth is also a fantastic author as well, so do check her out. We'll put a link to Hurley Books in there as well. Do check those out. Keep them coming, folks. We love hearing about your favourite bookshops. Come and drop us a line on social media. We on Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram, we're at BestsellerXB. Or if you want to email us, go to bestsellerexperiment.com and you'll see a contact tab there.
Brilliant stuff. And if your bookstore, your bookshop is featured on the Bestseller Experiment, you are allowed to put a poster in your window, the biggest you like, as featured on the Bestseller Experiment and the URL, and then take a photo of it, send it to us. And we'll put that on the show notes as well. So absolutely brilliant. Well, listen, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you again this week. I loved. Good luck with the all of the beginnings of the publication process now for the new book. Book 3 in the Woodville series, The Ghost of Ivy Barn. Can't wait to see that when it's out. And to everyone out there in writing land, we wish you a very productive and an excitingly challenging week writing. And if you like this podcast, tell your friends. Pop over to the website as well. Join our newsletter. You can get to that by bestsellerexperiment.com. Click on the newsletter tab, and you will get an email every week outlining all the great things that are coming up in the most recent episode as well, things that you'll learn about. So, Mr. Stay, have a great week, and I look forward to chatting with you again next week. And to everyone out there,
Lovely.
Have a fantastic time. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
Then a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.
Bye.